time we'll move to Senate Bill 944. The chair lays out Senate Bill 944 by Watson. There is a committee substitute. Senator Nichols sends up the committee substitute. The chair recognizes the author to explain the difference between the substitute and the bills filed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, the committee substitute Senate Bill 944 is a general PIA, Public Information Act omnibus bill that makes 4 improvements to the act. Each of these improvements came to my attention as we negotiated our contracting transparency bill over the past 2 years that you just heard, including last session, by the way, and overall they should make the Public Information Act process more efficient. First, the committee substitute to Senate Bill 944 closes a loophole by ensuring governmental bodies have a mechanism to obtain public information stored on their employees' private devices. This committee and the Senate at large passed this language last year, but it died in the House. Second, committee substitute Senate Bill 944 creates a new exception to disclosure for sensitive health care information. This language is an attempt to address hospitals' concerns that an exception in HIPAA will lead to the release of private patient records in Texas. Third, the bill allows governmental bodies to designate a single email address and a single mailing address to receive PIA requests. This should make it easier for requesters to submit a PIA request and for government employees to comply. And finally, it directs the Office of the Attorney General to promulgate a PIA request form that governmental bodies and requesters can use. This form would allow a requester to opt out from requesting confidential or otherwise accepted information, which would reduce the government's workload and result in a faster response to the requester. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, the committee substitute is a ledge council draft that makes 2 changes. The substitute contains cleanup language that the Office of the Attorney General suggested regarding governmental bodies, designating a single email and mailing address to receive requests. And second, the substitute adds language to require governmental employees to preserve public information in a backup or archive if they don't transfer that information to the governmental body or to the governmental body's server. Mr. Chairman, we're still in discussions with some of the stakeholders about the healthcare information exception. I think we're about there, so I would ask that we leave this pending for at least 1 or 2 days.
That's kind of the idea. This time we'll open up public testimony on Senate Bill 944 and call Jim Hemphill testify. Would state your name, who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Hemphill, lawyer in Austin, representing the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas, which I'm president this year, testifying in favor of this bill. I think Senator Watson laid it out pretty clearly about the things that this bill does. From our perspective, one of the most important things is closing what we call the custodian loophole. That was the subject of the proposed legislation that failed in the House last year. It clarifies that information that is developed and created by a public official in his or her capacity as a public official belongs to the public and not to that individual. And it creates mechanisms to ensure that the governmental body has access to that information and can provide that information under the Public Information Act. It's a very important issue, and this bill does a good job of addressing it. We also like the idea of the uniformity in email addresses and forms promulgated by the Attorney General to streamline the ability of people to request and governmental bodies to respond to these open records requests. We do have a few things, I think, to tie up on the health care. We certainly have no interest in trying to expose HIPAA-protected information to open records or to put any kind of governmental entity into a bind where they have HIPAA on one side and the open records laws on the other side. So I think we are close to having some agreement on that. So we're in favor of this bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else wish to testify on for or against Senate Bill 944? We'll show you the iPads in the back. Go ahead, state your name and who you represent.
Rob Johnson, clients of Foley Gardier for the bill. This is the bill that's not going to get any headlines. It's not based on any landmark Supreme Court rulings, but it is just important to the act. The Public Information Act is a statute that requires regular maintenance to operate efficiently. And for years, Senator Jeff Wentworth was kind of the de facto caretaker of the act. And every session or two, he would come in with a little adjustment here to keep everything running smoothly. We haven't had that kind of loving maintenance for several years. And this bill is an effort to get back to that. And I'm not condemning Senator Watson to spending his entire career helping the statute, but I would not be upset if he did. The temporary custodian change is particularly important, and I have personal experience on that. I represented a very small specialty district. They were so small that at that point in time they literally had a staff of 1 FTE. And they were trying to get information out of a former director who had been voted out under acrimonious circumstances, and it was almost impossible to respond to that PIA request, not for lack of effort by the governmental entity, but because they couldn't get cooperation from the former director. And so it's definitely a good change to put in the statute that the public officer is responsible for getting that information to the governmental body so that it can get to the requester and to the public. And in the committee substitute, there's been a small change to help preserve that information, which I think is a very good idea. There are a few more ideas that have been floating around that I hope there will be time to include in the bill, and I know there's concern about anything that could create a fiscal note, but I would at least recommend that we take another look at the specific exceptions that the Attorney General has already made a prior determination on, setting out clearly in the statute the governmental bodies should stop sending those to the Attorney General's office for determinations, because it's already been decided and we're wasting time and resources going through it again and again. And I've personally had requests held up because a governmental entity did that for purposes of delay. And then another one is in Hurricane Harvey, we ran into situations where municipalities and local entities were getting information in the middle of the crisis from their residents who needed help or residents who were offering help. And then after the crisis was over and the open records requests started coming in, they got concerned.
Thank you very much. I encourage you to continue to work with Senator Watson's office. Anybody else wish to testify on for or against Senate Bill 944? Hearing none, public testimony is now closed. The bill will be left pending. Thanks, Senator Watson.